All right, so like I said, today we're going to, of course, continue. I'm going to wrap up talking about Mesopotamia. Of course, I've got two topics to talk about left with Mesopotamia. I got to talk about the Assyrian Empire first. And then I am going to talk about what they call the Chaldean Empire, which was also called the Neo, or they call it the Neo or the New Babylonian Empire. So I'll bring up this slide right here, of course, the PowerPoint slide, which I've got in modules, which you can see right here. So yeah, I'm going to first talk about the Assyrian Empire. I'll get into them, of course, first. Of course, it says up there about the Assyrians that they were, of course, a Semitic state, like a Semitic empire and state, and also a people that emerged in northern Iraq. Northern Iraq and also part of eastern Syria. It's about the location of where they were. And they're different from like the Babylonian state of Hammurabi. They developed more or less on the Tigris River, the upper Tigris, more to the beginning of the Tigris River. That area, around that area, in northern Iraq, part of Syria, was known as Assyria. You remember the southern part of Iraq was called Babylonia. So we're kind of talking about these two separate areas of Mesopotamia, or now called Iraq. You study about the Assyrian Empire. It didn't start out as a major state. It, of course, it started out really as a small city state that was based around, like I said, the part of the Tigris River Basin, upper Tigris, of course. The city's either called Ashur or it's also called Assur. So it's pronounced either way. Although I think I may have mentioned earlier that they sometimes pronounce it Ashurian. That's one of the common names, I think, in the Middle East that they still kind of call it. But a lot of people in the West will also pronounce it Assyrian, either way. They believe that the name of the city and city-state, and later its empire and all that, the people, get its name from a god that they worshipped, which was pronounced, I think, likely called Ashur. And some people also say Assur as well. And it was a type of war god that was very famous to the Middle East. And so hence that's where the name Assyrian and the city's name kind of evolved from there. So people of Ashur, I guess, is kind of what the name Assyrian kind of meant, or Assyria, you want to call it that way. They had another famous goddess. I think I've got a picture of her, of Ishtar, so I can find. I'll get to that in a second. Where's that one down here? Yeah, it's one here of Ishtar. Ishtar was like a real popular goddess in the area around Iraq. She was a goddess I may have mentioned before that evolved from Inanna, which I think later evolved into Isis, I think, and gods like that. So she was kind of an important god, and so was Ashur, those two gods. So both those were their chief gods, but Ishtar is a famous god which is worshipped later by the Babylonians. Like you have the Ishtar Gate you may have heard of that was at Babylon at one point. Now, one thing about the Assyrian Empire became one of the greatest and largest empires in the Near East, bigger than any other empire up to that point so far. Here's a map showing you of the Assyrian Empire, about roughly where it was, but it stretched from Iraq, part of western Iran, southern Turkey, all the way into Syria, Israel. And at one point, it did stretch into part of North Africa, into Egypt. It briefly controlled it for a short time. So this empire was, I think, one of the first empires that actually ruled part of two continents, which nobody had ever done that before. You'll see it later, like the Persians do this, where they control 2 or 3 continents at one point, like territory-wise overall. And of course, they were known. The Syrians were known for their militaries. That's the thing. I mean, that's part of why they were able to conquer so much vast territory, because the Syrians were considered one of the first major states to have iron weapons. This is after the Hittites, got them first, that I talked about in the previous lecture. So they have very advanced civilization. That's a very good professional military. Their militaries, by the way, were copied by other powers later. Like the Persians copied them, the Greeks and the Romans copied a lot of their military, techniques and so on. They based a lot of their militaries on mass conscription. So they forced all the men to be, drafted into the military. They even took a lot of the best men from other states and forced them into their empire. They also were masters of siege warfare. They were known for building like siege engines that would take cities, and they took probably dozens and hundreds of cities in a lot of their conquests overall. So they are really advanced militarily, but they are very cruel. That's one thing that's very famous about the Syrians. They were known for mass murder, where they would just wipe out enemy populations and just take all the best people back to Assyria. And that's one thing they were kind of infamous for, which was mass deportation of enemy populations. They would take like the best men, the best women back, to Assyria. And then the rest, they probably just, eliminate, get rid of them. Probably the most famous was the Israelites. You may have heard the story about the 10 lost tribes. Yeah, the lost tribes of Israel. They were known to have been deported from Israel back to Assyria, where eventually they basically disappeared and were never heard from again. Now let's get into and talk more about the Assyrian Empire. Now, kind of here's some slides I've got here. Now, Assyria goes way back. You can go back to 3000 BC that they originally may have gone back to. But the Assyria we're talking about, it's mostly the Iron Age one. Like they had an old Assyrian Empire, which developed in the Bronze Age, which developed with the city of, early capital of Ashur, which I told you was on the Upper Tigris. But then they had this king named Tiglath-Pileser III, who came to power around the 8th century BC. He's a very important king, Tiglath-Pileser III. He's considered to be like one of the founders of what became known as the Neo or New Assyrian Empire. That's an empire that stretched predominantly, which I'll put right here, starts around the end of the 10th century, about 911 maybe, and goes down to about 612 BC. And it's an Iron Age empire, lasted around 300 years. Was based, of course, in the Upper Tigris in northern Iraq, but around a different city. The city called Nineveh eventually became its main capital. And that at one point was considered one of the greatest cities in the world, at least in the Near East. It was I think it had a huge population, which I don't think it was quite 1 million, but it was at least 500,000 maybe population-wise. So under him, it really starts to develop as a major, capital of this empire that they had. Then they had a king. I think I've got a slide on him too, which is they got another king named Sargon. I don't know if I have Sargon. I thought it did. I guess I don't. Sargon, but Sargon is another king I need to mention about, who's pretty important. He was the son of Tiglath-Pileser III, and he came right after his father died and reigned in the 8th century, the same century. And Sargon II, not related to Sargon I, was known for founding the Sargonid dynasty. It's a dynasty of 6 Assyrian kings, like a dynasty of them, that reigned from the 8th to the 7th centuries BC. So it's considered like the greatest dynasty, I think, of the Assyrians. And under his empire, the empire stretched, further out, and took over parts of Turkey, took over Babylonia, took over Israel, and of course, eventually, at one point, it even conquered part of what is basically Egypt. So It was like double in size, more or less. Like it says up there, capital, of course, of the Assyrian Empire at that time, Neo or New Assyrian Empire was Nineveh, north of Babylon. So that's correct about that. Yeah, just stuff about here. Yeah, they had mass cavalry, but there's something that's kind of funny. I used to like to mention about the Syrians, but the Assyrians were the first to use camels to supply their forces. Something you see a lot in the Middle East, later. But yeah, they invented like siege towers, and yeah, the battering ram. You see that list right there in that slide was something that they were supposedly the ones that invented that, like to knock down doors and stuff like that. They had another king, which I think I've got a slide on him. I believe I can find it. Yeah, there's Sargon. I wonder where he was. But Sargon, you can see, reigned more toward the end of the 8th century. So, yeah, Sargonid dynasty, one of their great rulers. And then Ashurbanipal, of course, another great ruler, of course, considered one of the last great ones they have of the Assyrian Empire. He was a 7th century king, and he's really their peak ruler. Now, they have 2 rulers that come afterwards. I think one of his sons and maybe a grandson that reigned later, but he's really the last great one they have. And their empire peaks in size because after that it starts shrinking and eventually it will collapse more toward the end of the 7th century. He was known for like conquering part of Egypt. So it's under him that the Syrians expanded kind of southwestward into Africa, which they held for a short time. And then also he was known for his building projects at Nineveh, which he had this lavish palace complex that he constructed in one of his wings, which I think I want to say the western wing of it. He built a huge library, one of the first ever built in the world. And it was called the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal. And it was considered the first library in the ancient world. It heavily influenced other people, to develop libraries. I think there's a story where I think when Alexander the Great conquered Mesopotamia, he actually found it, like explored it, I guess, and decided to build his own library in the Near East, which was the Library of Alexandria, which is, of course, later. It was excavated later in the 1800s, 19th century, and they found like thousands of cuneiform tablets that were still there with recorded information. I forget exactly how many it was. I mean, it close to 30,000 or more that they found. And it's in that library that they found a complete copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's why they know everything about it, because of that library. So that was something that Ashurbanipal was really famous for overall. That's a picture of maybe like what Nineveh looked like, and I guess where his palace complex, and I guess it was all part of this palace complex, and I guess must have been the library, must have been over here somewhere, I'm thinking, right there. But Nineveh today is now in ruins. Most of it was later destroyed, I think around 612 or so, the Battle of Nineveh, where I think the Chaldeans and a bunch of other forces destroyed the city, and there's not much left of it. There's one of the gates of Nineveh, which is still around today, which is near Mosul in northern Iraq. They've actually rebuilt some of this, and I think some ruins that were still there were destroyed by ISIS. If you remember them, that terrorist group, they had destroyed a bunch of antiquities, in Mesopotamia. That was kind of really tragic with that. It's like a loss that. Now, continuing, of course, so yeah, we're kind of talking about Ashurbanipal and all that. Now, what happened to the Assyrian Empire? Now, the Assyrian Empire, it collapsed about 612, somewhere around that time, roughly. And it was caused by a revolt in their empire in the southern part of the Assyrian Empire where Babylonia is. There was a people that was called the Chaldeans. They were a Semitic people of Babylonia. People call them Babylonians. although it's kind of debated about how they're related to the original Babylonians, like the ones of Hammurabi. They don't seem to think they're related anyhow, but they're both Semitic people living in the same region. And so from the remnants of that, we have a new state that eventually emerges at that point, which is called different names. A lot of people call it the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Of course, is one name that they usually dub it or nickname it. They also call it the Chaldean Empire. You'll see it either one. I think Chaldee or Chaldean is what they called it. Chaldee, I think is correct. And it was a very short-lived empire. It wasn't around very long. Maybe around, I want to say, 80 years that this state existed at one point in the Near East. And it was an empire that was stretched from Iraq into Syria. It controlled Israel. And then at one point, it actually controlled part of Egypt, but I think they lost it at one point. And it is famous for being one of the last Semitic empires that you really have in this region. Because after that, most of this region is controlled by people that are not Semitic, that come in like Persian, etc., that are more like Indo-Aryan or even Indo-Europeans come in at one point. And the empire peaks under a famous ruler, of course, which you've probably heard of in the Bible, the Old Testament, which is King Nebuchadnezzar. He's often called Nebuchadnezzar II as well. And so he was really their greatest monarch overall. I've got like a slide here, of course, on Nebuchadnezzar. You can see he reigned a long time. He was in power over 40 years. So he's over 40 years. And of course, a lot of people always ask, why is it called Neo or New Babylonian? What's the deal with that? They probably didn't call that back then, right? No, they didn't. The term New or Neo-Babylonian is just a nickname that modern historians called it. The reason why, there's two reasons for it. One is it became an empire that's centralized around Babylon in Babylonia. That's one reason for it. The other one, which is not in there, the other one is that the fact that it's so people don't get confused about the old or Paleo-Babylonian Empire, which was King Hammurabi's. So you got these two empires that were in Babylonia, but they were like almost 1,000 years apart. If you really read about the two, so they weren't around at the same time. So the Paleo old one was during Hammurabi's time. The Neo or New Babylonian Empire, of course, was Nebuchadnezzar's. So they're not related as far as they know, like just the background of them as far as they know. They only had a few rulers, like maybe 4 major rulers I know they had overall. But Nebuchadnezzar had a father named Nabopolassar. He founded the state. And then after he died, Nebuchadnezzar reigned for a majority of the time, like at least more than half of the state. He was in power at that point. What was he known for? Well, the big thing he did initially was he rebuilt Babylon, which had been like in ruins for a while. So he reconstructed the city. He built the fortifications of it. He built like a huge palace complex, which was called the Palace of Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar II, usually. He also built a lot of the entrance gates into it. There's one I'll show you, which is very famous today, which they've kind of, they have 2 versions of it, which is on the bottom here. But he is famous for building the Ishtar Gate, which is one of the most famous entrance gates into Babylon. It's a gate that honored the goddess Ishtar. Remember the fertility goddess I told you about that went back to Assyrian times. Supposedly has bulls and dragons on it. And there's 2 versions of it. They have this replica, which is in Babylon. And they have another one, which is right here. That one's in Germany, actually. That's, I think, the original gate. And I think some German archaeologists brought the gate back, or at least part of it, back to Germany. They reassembled it. And that's what they think it looks like, basically. So he was famous for that. And then the other thing that he was well known for, which I've already talked about as well, Nebuchadnezzar was famous for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which he built for his queen, his wife, who he married, who was from Iran, Queen Amitis or Amitis of Media. And they think it was around 200 feet tall. This was really like a palace, a ziggurat. And he built it because she was kind of lonely for her homeland, which I think was more tropical and things like that. And so he constructed this thing for her where she lived. And at one point, like I said, it was considered to be one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, according to the Greeks. I think I mentioned this already, and it collapsed later around Alexander the Great's time. Oh, one more thing about Nebuchadnezzar, which is very famous too. He was also known for conquering part of Egypt. He did do that, but he lost it. So he didn't hold on to it. And then he was also known, which I'll get to later, not really more today as much, but when we talk about the Israelites later, we'll talk about the fact that Nebuchadnezzar is the king that conquered the kingdom of Judah, destroyed that state around the 580s BC, which included the sacking of Jerusalem, their capital, and also the Temple of Solomon. The first temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, and it led to the Babylonian captivity of what became the Jews later, which will be like around 50 years that they'll be in captivity under the Babylonians. So he's notorious for that, and he is mentioned in the Bible. I think you could study about the ancient Bible in the Old Testament. He's really considered to be one of the most famous kings in the Bible, up to that time. You got the books of Jeremiah, book of Chronicles, and also the book of Daniel. All those books actually describe his reign. I think the book of Daniel is considered to be the one that's really the most famous overall, that talks about his reign. Now, after he died, his empire fell apart. The later rulers were not as good. And actually, there were 6 rulers, looks like it, not 4. I got that wrong about that, but I don't think there were some that were kind of terrible rulers. And what happened was their empire got overrun by the Persian Empire, which you can see is to the east. And they came in and swallowed up that whole region of the Near East, including Turkey, Syria, and Mesopotamia, and even Egypt later. And that was all under King Cyrus the Great and other Persian kings, which I'll get more into later. So that empire of the Chaldeans was very short-lived. It didn't last very long overall. Right, now, next I'm going to go ahead and I'll do a little review here real quick, and then after that I'm going to move on, of course, to talk about Egypt. And let me go ahead and pull up, of course, some of the review questions I have, of course, in the study guide for y'all. Of course, it says, who are the Babylonians? The Babylonians were a Semitic people of mostly Akkadian background, who also were ruled by people that were called the Amorites, who were also Semitic from Syria. And they were part of an empire that was later called the Older Paleo-Babylonian Empire, the original one, of course. And it was founded by this king named King Hammurabi, who reigned in the 18th century BC. And it's his empire that will last for about maybe 200 years in most of Iraq and part of Syria too. What was the code of Hammurabi? It was a Babylonian legal code system developed by King Hammurabi in the early 18th century BC. How many laws were developed on it? Well, he saw those columns, right? That columns they built it on, like those stone columns of steel. About 282 was the actual total that they've been able to translate. They mentioned eye for an eye, 196. That was actually the law 196 was eye for an eye. Lex talionis, or principle of retaliation, or law of retaliation too as well, is the main way the code works. The fact where it's based off of like equal compensation. So somebody takes your eye out, you have a right to equal compensation, which could be not an eye, but it could be some kind of fine or something as well. Could be life for life too, like death for death, that kind of thing as well. What civilization ancient Turkey sacked the Babylonians? That was the Hittites, who were in Turkey. And what was the origin of the Hittites? They were believed to be a type of Indo-European people that were from the Ukraine. They migrated into the region. Kind of that's at the top right there, you see again. Let's see what else. What new technology was first mass produced by the Hittites? Iron. They first developed iron technology and iron weapons and tools. And so that led to the Iron Age, which would follow later. Hittites, of course, wiped out the Sea Peoples. You'll probably need to know them later, the Sea Peoples, which they're not sure who they are, the Sea Peoples. But who are the Assyrians? Where they developed as a civilization empire? I just mentioned that a few minutes ago. But the Assyrians, of course, were a Semitic people in northern Iraq, in Syria. They were based along the upper Tigris River. They were based around a city, a major city, that was called Assur or Ashur, which was also named after a war god that was also called Ashur. Yeah, it's kind of confusing, but it's the same thing, the same way it's spelled, I guess. What famous Assyrian goddess was popular god, social fertility, love, etc.? I think it was like fertility, love, and I think sex is too as well. But Ishtar, which the Ishtar Gate's named after. Who were the Assyrians? Why were the Assyrians cruel conquerors? They were known for, killing a lot of people that were enemies of their state. And they also were known for mass deportation. So mass murder, mass deportation, those were things they were known for. And they're also known for their professional armies, which allowed them to control vast amounts of territory over a large area in the Near East. What was the Neo-Assyrian Empire? It was an Iron Age empire between the 10th and 7th centuries that lasted about 300 years. And it was based around the capital of Nineveh, which is up in the upper Tigris Basin above Iraq. It's near Mosul. Who were some famous rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire? You had Tiglath-Pileser III. He was considered one of the first founders of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. You had his son, Sargon II. He was the founder of the Saganid dynasty. He was known for expanding the empire into Babylonia and Israel. And then you had Ashurbanipal, who expanded the empire even further, to Turkey and all the way down to Egypt. Ashurbanipal was also known for his royal library, too. It was called the Royal Library of Nineveh. So that's just lecture material, for later that we'll have, and also on quizzes. Make sure you look over the lectures, and of course the review sections also as well, because you can use those later for upcoming quizzes and exams, because that pretty much wraps up ancient Mesopotamia, part 1 and part 2 there. Of course, later I'll get to the Persians, not now. We'll kind of skip them for now, because I'm going to move on to talk about ancient Egypt. I'll get to them later. Next week sometime, I think on Monday, I told you, I'll have, of course, a Canvas quiz coming up on Mesopotamia. So I'll have an announcement and, of course, the quiz up later, early next week. All right, so let me go ahead and move on, of course, next to get into what is, and I forgot about the Chaldeans. I don't know if we can, I guess we can go, I guess I can do that real quick if you want me to, but kind of just did that, didn't we? We just did the Chaldeans. I guess we'll skip that part because we just did that. But anyway, let me go ahead and move on to ancient Egypt, more or less. And I think I did everything in that list pretty much that we got. Yeah, I did all that. But so let's go ahead and move on to ancient Egypt. Now Egypt, of course, is the fourth civilization that develops me see something here and switch this if you don't mind. Where are you? There it is. Thank you. So we're getting into Egypt next. So it's the fourth oldest river valley civilization overall, dating back to, of course, 3 to 4,000 BC. That would be about when it is. So it's based mostly along the Nile River basin. North Africa, like northeastern Africa, is about the location of where it is. We've kind of already talked about this already. The dating of Egypt is, a lot younger civilization, of course, compared to, of course, the other civilizations we've already talked about and mentioned about, at this point. And Egypt, of course, the first thing I'm going to talk about today about ancient Egypt, of course, is, of course, the fact that it's got a lot of famous geographic features about it, which the most famous thing, of course, like I said, is the Nile River basin. Without the Nile River, it wouldn't exist. Because if you know about Egypt, Egypt is majority desert today. Mostly, they have some oases predominantly, and in fertile land that's along the river basin. But let me first talk about some famous features, of course, about the Nile River, of course, today. First thing, of course, about the Nile is that it's the longest river in the world. The actual length of the river, that varies, but it's somewhere between 41 and 4,200 miles long, which includes, I think, its tributaries, which I'll get to a little later. It's also kind of strange, the Nile River basin. This is a better picture right here. But you can see the river flows from south to north. Looks like it's defying gravity or whatever, but it's actually flowing from the equator of Africa northward toward the Mediterranean Sea. Africa is actually kind of slanted down toward the Mediterranean due to various land escarpments that exist. So that is kind of some features which are, very famous, about the Nile River. And I'll get more into some other features about it in a second, which are, of course, well known as well. Before I do that, I did want to mention that Herodotus was one of the first to write about Egypt and also the Nile River in his series of books, The Histories of Herodotus, which were written about 2,500 years ago or so. Herodotus once said about Egypt that he said that Egypt was the gift of the Nile. What does he mean by that? He means that basically that without the Nile River, Egypt wouldn't have existed, as a people, as a civilization. And so the river created the fertile valley, which led to farming. And farming led to civilization, like we've talked about before. And so that's what he meant about it. Without the Nile River, there probably nobody'd want to live there that much, because most people in Egypt live predominantly around where the river is, like Cairo and Luxor. Those are the two most populated cities, of course, in modern Egypt now. Let me talk about also the main tributaries that make up also the Nile River valley. I think I've got a slide on that I can show you, which is right here. There's two main tributaries of the Nile. You've got the Blue Nile and you've got the White Nile. The Blue Nile starts in Ethiopia, like in the eastern part of Africa, and flows westward, northward. And the White Nile starts way down in east central Africa, and its main source is Lake Victoria, largest lake in Africa. Those two rivers, we get this out the way, eventually join and form one trunk at what is Khartoum, which you see on the bottom of that map there, which is one of the cities in Sudan today. And then from there, it flows northward towards Egypt. So you can see that the main trunk of the Nile goes from Khartoum all the way to where Cairo is in the delta of the Nile. So that's a part of the river, but it's not the whole length I told you about, because the tributaries also are part of that as well. So yeah, there's got the blue versus the white, basically. But also you'll notice that they got these things called cataracts, the so-called 6 cataracts of the Nile River basin that they have. These are a series of waterfalls and rapids that are along the Nile River course as it goes from Khartoum all the way to Aswan in southern Egypt. So the river's actually flowing downward as it goes from Sudan into Egypt. And you'll notice they're numbered 1 through 6. I don't know if you see that or not. Let me expand it here so you can, I think it's about as big as I can get it, but you can kind of see it's probably numbered there 1 through 6. And the reason why it's numbered that way is because when the British were exploring Egypt and Sudan in the 19th century, they literally had to climb up the waterfalls to get from Egypt all the way down into where Khartoum is. So they numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so at one point there were 6 cataracts. I think one's gone now, but there's like originally 6 of them at one point. Also, another thing too about the Nile, which is important as well. There's some terms you need to learn about ancient Egypt. That's important. First of all, these two, Kemet and Deshret, are both Egyptian hieroglyphic terms. They were well known in ancient times. Kemet was the ancient name that the Egyptians called Egypt, called their land or country. They call it the Kemet, which meant black land, supposedly. Or some people say the cultivated land or fertile land. I think may have been another translation. I think they called it too as well. That's where most people lived. That's where all their farming took place, where the culture kind of took off. Now they have what they call Deshret. Deshret is the area where it's like desert areas, the red land, the non-fertile areas. These are areas that are on both sides of the Nile outside the fertile areas. I'll come back to that slide right there. If you go down here to this picture, you can see how dramatic it is. Like once you step outside the green area, that's the green area is kind of like Kemet, and then there that's kind of like desert is Deshret, basically. And like I said, most people in Egypt kind of live close to the river basin overall, and it can be very dramatic. You literally have 1 foot in the desert and 1 foot in the green fertile area. You know. Now, if you go on Google Earth, I don't know if you've ever been on Google Earth much, but go on Google Earth and look at the Nile River, and you'll see how green it is, like along the river, and everything else like desert on both sides, except for various oases that are, throughout Egypt, etc. Oh, going back up too, which is right here. Of course, they have the Nile Delta. You can see above there in that picture that the river eventually flows into a large-sized delta, which it gets the Greeks coined the term delta from the Greek alphabet. The letter delta just looks like a triangle, and so it kind of has a triangle shape to it, and so they call it delta because of that. I think at one point there were multiple branches of it, but there's only 2 now. There's the main one is called Rosetta. They have another one called Demeta or something like that is the other one. I don't really have to know that, but it only has really 2 main branches today that kind of goes out into the Mediterranean Sea. The term Nile is it's kind of a debate about where it came from, but they think it came from Greek. The Greeks called the Nile River Nilos, which you see on the bottom there, and Nilos supposedly meant something like in Greek, river or great river, something like that. That's what it kind of means. And I think they seem to think the Egyptians called it that too, or great canal or great river. It's one of the 2 that they called it, but Nilos or Nilus is kind of like the origin. And that's why they sometimes just call it the Nile, because I think it already has the word river in it, supposedly. They believe anyway. One more thing on the bottom of that slide that you're looking at. Let me talk about quickly about Egypt's agriculture and also the seasons. Egypt only had 3 seasons, which were all based on farming, pretty much. And the season kind of went through various phases. I guess what would be like kind of like the spring to us, they would have like a sowing season, which was called Peret. That's where they would plant most of their crops, usually. And then they had the summertime. They would have the flood season when the Nile River would inundate and flood, due to like monsoons, they think. Although the Egyptians thought the gods caused the river to flood, which is funny. And the flood season was called Akhet, which doesn't mean flood. It actually means, I think, more like inundation, which is a river that kind of rises and then crests. Like when we have a lot of rain, the rivers will kind of go to flood stage and come down. And that's what they call that. It's really inundation, not flood. But people just call it the flood season, Akhet. And then Shamu, which I guess would be kind of like almost like the fall to us, would be the harvest time, basically. Although they had really 2 harvests like we do, spring and the fall, where they'd have different kind of crops come in. What were the typical kind of crops they had in ancient Egypt? Like typical like barley, kind of wheat kind of crops they had, that kind of thing. But they had sorghum, another kind of grain crop that's well known. They also had like the date palm. Also the flax plant was something they had, which you may be familiar with. Flax. And flax, you could probably eat it or something like that. But flax was used to make clothing, which was linen, which linen for a long time was one of the main kind of cloth that people wore, like up to like Greek and maybe even Roman times overall. So kind of just talking about the seasons of Egypt. They don't really have a winter, because that area is kind of warm. We're in the Middle East and close to the equator, but they don't really have much of a winter or cold season much. Mostly hot over there. All right, so let me go ahead and move on. Let's also talk about how Egypt was unified into really one state. They think that Egypt unified in the 32nd century BC from what they think was 2 states that kind of were around, going back to the late bronze, to the late part of the Neolithic period, like the end of it. There were 2 states that were rivals. They had one called the Lower Kingdom. The Lower Kingdom was an Egyptian state that was in what they call Lower Egypt. What is Lower Egypt? Lower Egypt is what they call the northern part of Egypt today, and it's part of the Delta area, like the Nile Delta. So it's the northern part of Egypt. They call it Lower Egypt because it's at the bottom of the river, like where the river empties out into the Mediterranean Sea. I'll get to the crowns in a second. In the Upper Kingdom was in the upper part of Egypt, which was in the southern part of Egypt. It would be more into the valley of the river, which the southern part of Egypt is more mountainous. If you've ever been down there. So that's the difference. It's kind of confusing, isn't it? Lower, upper. It seems like it should be the opposite. But it has to do with where the river is. So the upper part of Egypt is where the river more begins, and the lower part is where it ends. Both states, by the way, had pharaohs, which I forget to left it out for some reason. I just don't have room, I think I've got room to put it in here for you real quick. But they both had different crowns that they had, which are important. They had the Lower Kingdom. The king or pharaoh had a red crown, and then the king of Upper Egypt had a white crown that they wore. And what happened was, over time, when the pharaoh would unify into one state, the pharaohs would wear both crowns. So they're kind of seen as both rulers of both states. And so the pharaoh's crown later is red and white. It represents both states, of course, and all that.
So it's kind of some background in it. I haven't gotten to like the unification of Egypt at this point, but kind of talking about the fact that it eventually unified from more than one state, not just one. There was a king, of course, that unified, of course, Egypt into one state. I've got a slide on him if you want to look at him. They call him different names. He's often called either Narmer or also called Menes. So you'll see either name being used. They believe he unified the state. They think around maybe, it's kind of a debate about when he lived. They think maybe at the latest, actually, 32nd century BC, or maybe 3100. It's kind of a debate about when Menes lived. And he had different names. Menes was his Greek name that the Greeks called him. And then Narmer was the name that the Egyptians called it, like from hieroglyphs that they found in Egypt. And they believed that Menes or Narmer was a king of Upper Egypt, Upper Kingdom. So he came from like the southern part of Egypt, and he eventually conquered the Lower Kingdom in Lower Egypt and forced them to form one state. So he absorbed them into his state, and it became one state. And so that's how it came about, Egypt being founded as one state. So he put the two states together. Menes or Narmer went on to, of course, found different things he's known for. The most famous thing he did, of course, was he founded a capital, which was the city of Memphis, which is near Cairo. The ruins of it is near Cairo. And Memphis became like the administrative capital of ancient Egypt, which it was for many years, over many different dynasties. Also, Menes or Narmer was the one that was the first pharaoh of Egypt to adopt both crowns, both red and white, which were kind of combined into one crown. It has different names too, the double crown of Egypt. I think I've got them in this slide right here above if you want to look at it, but they either call it Sayent or Sekhemti. I think Sayent is the Greek name and Sekhemti is the Egyptian name that they call the double crown. So he wore it, and you'll see it sometimes also on like, not just pharaohs, but you'll see him on some of the gods wearing them, like the double crown and all of that. Menes was also, by the way, he founded the first dynasty of Egypt, which Egypt had like around 30 dynasties or so, and so it's the first of many royal dynasties that control, ancient Egypt. Now they have a thing you see on the right there in that picture. It's called the Narmer palette, which is well known archaeologically. And the Narmer palette is some kind of stone that was found in ancient Egypt in 1898, an archaeological dig, and it supposedly depicts or describes the reign of King Narmer or Menes. That's why they think he's a real person, because they found it. And it depicts him unifying Egypt. I think there's another picture here, which I think is bigger than that one, showing the whole thing, which is right there. So it's either 31st or 32nd century. It's kind of a debate about when he lived. But they believe it was some kind of palette that was used by painters to paint like statues, believe it or not. They would paint the faces on statues, etc. And evidently have these inscriptions in it which described his reign and all that. And that's actually one stone you're looking at, which is showing both sides of it, of what it looks like. But supposedly it depicts him conquering Egypt in it. All right. Let me also move on to talk more about Egypt, about Egypt and how it's divided into different historical periods or periods of it. And Egypt has like three kingdoms that are like main periods of ancient Egypt, which you can see there. You've got the Old Kingdom, you've got the New Kingdom, the Old Kingdom, you got the Middle Kingdom, and you got the New Kingdom in that order. So from chronological order in time.
So here's a picture too, if you want to look at that banner slide right there. But yeah, old, middle, new. It's easy to remember. Kind of like the Stone Age, old Stone Age, middle Stone Age, new Stone Age. So it's all based on archaeology. The fact that the old is older than the middle and the middle is older than the new. So that's why it's in that order. They also have like intermediate periods, which they don't really talk much about that in that slide right there in the middle. But there are intermediate periods between a lot of these periods, which are kind of like chaotic periods where Egypt breaks up. And they do have a post-empire period too, where Egypt declines in the Iron Age as well. I won't talk about most of those periods, but I'll probably briefly later talk about the second intermediate period, which happened between the Middle and New Kingdoms. And in these lectures on Egypt, mostly I'm going to talk about the Old and the New Kingdoms. Old Kingdoms more known for tomb building with the pyramids. They call it the Age of Pyramids, which I'll get to later, the Old Kingdom. And in the middle of the New Kingdom is more known for temple building, like building temples and Valley of the Kings, where they buried their pharaohs. And historians and archaeologists know more about the New Kingdom than any other of the different periods of Egypt. Middle Kingdom, which happened between the two, was a weaker period. It's not as strong. I usually don't cover much on it. It's just not that powerful period. But it lasted, you can see, 400 years. So most of these were around, each of them were around almost like around 400 years, or close to it, or more. So that's how they break it down. Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and of course, New Kingdom. Right, let me get into next and talk about also the gods of Egypt. That's, of course, something we need to get into, of course, and talk about mythology, of course, about ancient Egypt. And the Egyptians had a lot of gods, a lot of gods. They had, I think, at least 100 or more gods that they worship. A lot of the gods were part man, part animal, like anthropomorphic. So they usually call them. So you see some that are in like human animal form. Then you sometimes see some that are just human form. So you see both overall. And they had a chief god, which was very important, which is, of course, the god Amen. Amen is the chief god associated, of course, with ancient Egypt. It was kind of considered like their national state god, kind of like a Zeus or a Jupiter. In fact, some people thought it was. Like when the Greeks came in, like Alexander the Great, he thought it was like Zeus, pretty much. And Amen was considered like a creator god, a solar god or sun god, like Ra was a sun god. And so his cult was so powerful that sometimes they would call it the cult of Amen Ra, because it was it's like the main religion they had overall. And Ra, over time, was merged with it. They kind of came synonymous with each other. It was seen as like the same thing. You can see it was worshipped at Thebes, which is in the southern part of Egypt, now where Luxor is today. And so it was basically, like I said, like a state religion, more or less. And there were hundreds of priests, which I'll get to later, which controlled the temple of Karnak, where people, the state itself with this religion was almost like a theocracy. That's how powerful the priests of Amun were. Other gods which are also famous, I'll mention too. You may have heard of Anubis. Anubis was another god which was well known, of course. He's the so-called jackal-headed god, often associated with like mummification of the dead. He was seen as the god that judged the dead in the underworld, like if your soul was good or bad. So he was a very important god. When they would like embalm people for mummification, a lot of priests would usually wear like a jackal mask. They also had another god,
who was well known, who was named Horus. You may have heard of Horus as well. And Horus was seen as one of the main falcon-headed. He was a falcon-headed god, of course, associated with those three things: sky, war. He's a war god. He was also the god of kingship. He's the main god that's often associated when the pharaoh is on the throne. Because if you know about ancient Egypt, pharaohs were seen as being like living gods, part god, more or less. And I'll get to it later. He does have a father and son, which were famous in mythology: Osiris and Isis. Yeah, Osiris and Isis. That was his father and mother. That's well known. Horus was also merged with Ra too, which is true about that. So they're kind of later seen as being like the same thing as well. Also, another famous god, which is well known, is the goddess Isis, who's got on the bottom there. And Isis was the wife of Osiris. I'll get more into the mummification of Osiris, but she's very important. She's associated with like things like fertility, sex, love, marriage, and even alcohol as well. So they had kind of like a goddess of alcohol as well. I'll get to like what happens with her and her husband. That's her on the right in red. Usually Isis is seen with cow horns on her head, which is a symbol of fertility. And that's her giving eternal life to Queen Nefertari, who was a famous wife of Ramses the Great. She's also kind of seen as being very similar to another goddess in ancient Egypt called Hathor. And so some people think it's kind of like the same thing. In some instances, Hathor is the mother of Horus and not Isis. This depends on what mythology you read about and all of that. Then they have Osiris. Osiris, of course, was the husband of Isis. And he was, of course, the king of the underworld, the king of the dead that reigned in the afterlife. Of course, there's a very famous story associated with Osiris, which is well known in Egyptian mythology. It has to do with the mummification of Osiris, because you can see he's, in the shape of a mummy, which you see in that picture. And Osiris had a brother who was named Set or Seth. He was very jealous of the fact that Osiris was the king of Egypt, and he wanted the throne. And so if you know what happened, Set tricked Osiris in like a game. Like he brought this chest to the palace. He basically told everybody in this little party or whatever, whoever could fit in the chest, would win the game. And so everybody tried to fit in the chest. Nobody could do it. Osiris eventually got in the chest. He fit. And of course, what happened was Set closed the thing, locked it, and took the chest and threw it in the Nile River, where Osiris drowned. Supposedly the chest floated into the Mediterranean Sea, and it ended up where Phoenicia is. And what happened was Isis went and found the body and began trying to mummify Osiris, put him, mummify the body, prepare him for the afterlife. Well, Set got wind of this, and he cut the body up into 14 pieces. And so what happened was Isis had to go and put him back together, which he did. And after that, he was mummified. So I want to mention about mummification. It's very important because the Egyptians believed that the body has to be in one piece or they won't make it in the underworld. Their soul will be destroyed. So that's why everybody wanted to be mummified, especially pharaohs and all that. Also, yes, like I just talked about Set. Set went on, by the way, to be the god of chaos, the god of deserts, the god of infertility, also storms as well. He's kind of seen as this cat god, evil brother, I guess,
And supposedly he was banished by Horus, who eventually challenged him to control Egypt. And he was defeated by Horus. So that's why Horus is the god of kingship and all of that. So he was banished to the deserts and all that. So he's kind of like a desert god and all of that. That's well known. Another god which I want to mention about too, you may have heard of, is Thoth. Yeah, Thoth or Thoth. It's pronounced either way, Thoth or Thoth. Thoth as well. Actually, let me talk about this one first, and I'll get to the other one. Sobek. Let me do Sobek first. Sobek is another god. Let me get to first. He's famous. Sobek is he's the god of war. He's a god of military power, male fertility, the power of the pharaoh. Also the god of crocodiles as well. Sobek is a very famous god because crocodiles are of course well known in ancient Egypt. And he had a cult center, which was at Fayum, which is a city in western Egypt, which is part of an oasis that's west of the Nile River basin. So he's very famous. And then the other one I was going to talk about too, which is famous, one more I'll give you, is Thoth or Thoth. And he, of course, is a famous bird god of ancient Egypt. It's actually a moon god. And he is known for, of course, being the ancient Egyptian god associated with wisdom and knowledge, anything to do with wisdom, like knowledge, medicine, science, math, writing, you name it. And he's also seen as the god of like scribes, priests, and supposedly that was the god that gave the Egyptians hieroglyphics and papyrus, which is a type of hedge plant that grows in the Nile. And it was used to make paper out of, which they wrote on. So the Egyptians wrote on paper, they wrote on stone, but papyrus was the first form of paper that people have, that and parchment paper, which is made from animal skin. Let me talk about one more thing, and I think that's it for today, for lecture-wise. Let me talk about, for a few minutes, also on mummification as well. Mummification, of course, is of course a famous thing you've probably, of course, heard of in ancient Egypt. Mummification is, of course, a name that's been around. It's used in all kinds of cultures, like the Incas mummified people, the dead as well. The Egyptians were the ones that first did it in ancient times. And the name was derived actually not from the Egyptians, but from the Arabs. The Arabs called it mummification from the word mumia, which is an Arabic word. And it's an Arabic word for tar pitch, which is a type of material that they think was like asphalt that may have been used in the embalming process, like a liquid form of asphalt. And so it led to the nickname for what they call the Egyptian funerary practices of burying their dead over time. But like I said, the name has been used by different cultures now in modern times, like say what they do with the Incas, or sometimes I joke about how they'd find a dead body in a house and they would say, oh, it's been mummified. So hence the name, of course, being used. Now, let me talk about the process itself, how it's done, at least some theories on how they did it. The Greeks were the first to write about it. Herodotus, if you know about him, he was the first to write really about it. And so we don't really know much about that from beyond that than what we've been able to figure from archaeology in modern times. What would they do first with the corpse? Well, the first thing they would do is they would remove all the organs from the body, except the heart. The heart was kept in the body. Mostly the reason for that is the belief that the heart was important in the afterlife. It was believed that the god Anubis would weigh your heart against the feather. They call it the weighing of the heart, to see if you were good or bad, your soul. And that would, I guess, make or break how things went for your soul in the afterlife. Then all the organs, by the way, go down here, were put in what they call canopic jars, which I think of. Here's a picture of asphalt if you want to see it, which is right here. I've got pictures of the canopic jars, which are right here. And the organs were put in different ones. They're put in different ones. They were guarded by these four sons of Horus, called the four sons of Horus. Domatef, you see, which is on the top left, was the one that would guard what is the stomach. So you got that one right there. Cabesinas, which is on the bottom left, would guard your intestines. They have another one named Happy or Hoppy. I think it's Happy, was one that would guard the lungs. He was looked like a baboon, you can see there on the top right. Then Msati, which looks like a human, would guard your liver, basically. And so each one would guard certain organs of the body. Most of these organs were salted down, of course, is what happened. Then to dry the body out, if you know about this, they would cover the body in kind of like salt, basically like a type of mineral salt, which the Greeks had a nickname for it. They called it natron, but it was more like baking soda that you find in your refrigerator. So they'd cover the whole corpse in it, and they would do this for like something like 6 weeks. That they would cover the body. That helped with the preservation of the corpse later. Later, they would wrap the mummy, is what they would do. And then they would cover it with like tar pitch and other kinds of ingredients that would act as a seal on the outside of it. So the mummification process itself could take around 2 months. It took a long time. It was a lengthy process. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people, have been mummified. Not just back then, but even up to more towards late antiquity. They're always finding mummies buried in various tombs throughout Egypt, like all the time. A lot of them are buried in coffins with sarcophaguses, and then they even find some cases where people are even buried just in the desert, which acts really as a good method to preserve the body also as well. So the Egyptians really went out of their way to really try and preserve the body in all that. So, and by the way, the brain, if you wonder about that, they didn't keep the brain supposedly. They would take that out too. But supposedly they didn't put it in the canopic jars, if you wonder, of course, about that. So anyway, I'm going to stop here. I will talk about, the Old Kingdom, the so-called Age of Pyramids later. I think is a good stopping point at this point on Egypt. Next week on Monday, I'll have a part 2 lecture where I will continue with ancient Egypt. I am going to have some probably, like I said, Canvas quizzes I told you I'll have coming up that are kind of important overall. I think I just showed it to you originally already, but don't forget there's going to be some new ones coming up on Mesopotamia. I am going to have one on a documentary on ancient Egypt. I might show you a clip of it, I think, next week on Monday for you about it, but you'll have that coming up. But you can see those 2 main ones you got to do now. If you haven't done the pre-test and also the prehistory quiz number 1, you need to go ahead and, of course, work on that for now. So that's it for pretty much this week, lecture-wise. So we pretty much did prehistory. We talked about ancient Mesopotamia. We have already started on, of course, ancient Egypt this way. Like I said, it's going to go fast, this class. This is, of course, a fast-paced class, 7 weeks. So hope y'all are kind of keeping up on this. But I am going to post this lecture to my YouTube channel, of course, afterwards. So if anybody's got any questions, let me know about it. I don't know if Claude had any questions, about anything, but I think Claude is on here right now. Hey, but you got any questions, let me know later. Okay. Yeah. Bye.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, good. So anyway, that's it for the week. Y'all take care.
and I'll see y'all next week. So have a good weekend coming up. So take care.